While my cousins were celebrating their millions at my grandfather's funeral, I stood there holding a crumpled envelope with a single plane ticket inside. They laughed at me like it was a joke. 6 months later, they would beg for my forgiveness. My name is Eric Whitmore, and I'm about to tell you how the worst day of my life became the start of everything I never expected. The church smelled of old wood polish and lilies, the kind of suffocating sweetness that made me dizzy. Rows of people dressed in black filled every pew. My grandfather, Roland Whitmore, lay in the polished mahogany casket at the front. A man who had built an empire out of nothing, Whitmore Shipping, fleets of cargo ships stretching across the oceans. He turned a single boat into a billion-dollar dynasty. Everyone wanted their piece of him now that he was gone. Everyone except me. I just wanted one more game of chess, one more gruff laugh, one more story about the sea. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as he unfolded the will. My uncles, aunts, cousins leaned forward like predators circling prey. Preston, my older cousin, stood tall in his $5,000 Armani suit, already rehearsing his CEO speech in his head. Mallory, his sister, couldn't hide her grin behind oversized designer sunglasses, probably daydreaming about which yacht she'd christen with champagne first. Their parents, Vernon and Beatrice, had smugness carved into their faces like stone, hands twitching with anticipation as if they could snatch the inheritance before the words were even spoken. And then there was me, Eric, a high school history teacher who had driven 3 hours in a beat-up Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and squealing brakes. I'd parked between 2 black Range Rovers that probably cost more than my house. My wife Emily held my hand tightly, sensing the tension before I even walked through the church doors. My kids, Claire and James, sat quietly in the back row, too young to understand the sharp edges of greed that hung in the air. The lawyer's voice echoed through the vaulted ceilings. To my beloved grandchildren, Preston and Mallory. Cheers muffled behind hands. He listed properties, accounts, control of Whitmore Shipping. Applause broke out, thinly disguised as sobs. My chest tightened as Emily squeezed my hand harder. Then the lawyer paused, his gaze shifting to me, and to my grandson Eric. A hush fell. I could feel eyes drilling into my skin. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a thin envelope, and handed it to me. I tore it open with shaking hands. Inside was a plane ticket. One ticket, no check, no deed, no company shares. Just a ticket to a city I barely recognized, printed on cheap paper that smelled faintly of dust. Laughter erupted around me. Preston slapped his knee like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. Laughter erupted around me. Preston slapped his knee like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. Mallory smirked, whispering something to her mother that made her choke back a laugh. Vernon muttered pathetic loud enough for half the church to hear. My ears burned. My face flushed. Emily's hand trembled against mine. Claire and James stared at me with wide eyes, confused. I wanted to disappear, to crawl under the pew and vanish. But I stood frozen, that stupid crumpled ticket in my hand, while my family bathed in millions. That funeral wasn't just about saying goodbye to my grandfather. It was the day I learned that sometimes the smallest gift carries the biggest secret, and sometimes the people laughing at you are standing on ground that's about to crumble beneath their feet. The days that followed blurred into one another. Preston gave interviews to the press. Mallory flaunted designer shopping sprees on Instagram, and my father avoided my calls. I went back to my 1-bedroom apartment with the water-stained ceiling shaped like Texas, back to teaching bored high school kids about history they didn't care about. My alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. every morning. The neighbor's dog barked at 6, and Mrs. Chen did her morning exercises on the balcony across from mine. Life carried on as if nothing had changed, but something had. That envelope with the plane ticket sat on my dresser like a taunt. I picked it up every night, staring at the destination printed in bold letters. Every time I asked myself the same question, why? Why had my grandfather left me this? One evening, after grading a stack of essays, Emily came into the room and sat beside me. "Eric," she whispered, touching the envelope, "maybe you should go." I shook my head. "We can't afford it. And even if we could, it's just a ticket, Emily. They got millions. I got this." Her eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "Your grandfather wasn't the kind of man to do anything without reason. If he wanted you to have this, there's a reason. Maybe the ticket isn't the gift. Maybe it's the key." The words stuck in my mind. The key. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the drip, drip, drip of the bathroom faucet. My chest tightened with a thought I couldn't shake. What if Emily was right? 6 months later I would learn the truth. And when I did, I would never look at my family or myself the same way again. Eric leaves the funeral humiliated with only a plane ticket. But his wife plants the seed. What if it's not worthless, but a key? The weeks after the funeral felt like quicksand. Every morning, I'd drag myself out of bed at 5:30, slap the snooze button twice, and shuffle to the kitchen where the coffee machine sputtered like it was dying a slow death. The ceiling stain above our bed still looked like Texas. Only now, if I stared long enough, I swore it was turning into a skull. Emily noticed the change in me. She never said the words, but I saw it in the way she lingered at the doorway before work, the way her hand hesitated when she brushed mine at dinner. My kids noticed too. Claire would ask, "Dad, are you okay?" And I'd force a smile, telling her I was just tired. James didn't ask. He just watched me silent, like he could see through every lie I told myself. And every night that envelope sat there, on my dresser, waiting. I tried ignoring it. I buried myself in lesson plans, in grading endless essays about the American Revolution, in cafeteria duty where kids threw French fries like grenades. But no matter how busy I kept myself, my mind wandered back to that envelope. That stupid ticket. At school, my colleagues whispered about the Whitmore funeral. Word had gotten around. One teacher pulled me aside in the lounge and asked, "So is it true? They got the company and you got a plane ticket?" His voice was too curious, too amused. I laughed it off, pretended it didn't bother me. But inside, it burned. The ticket haunted me because it wasn't nothing. If my grandfather had wanted to leave me nothing, he could have just left me out of the will. He didn't. He left me something, a message maybe, or a test. And that gnawed at me. It was a Tuesday evening when Emily finally snapped me out of my haze. She came home from her nursing shift, hair pulled back, exhaustion in her eyes. She dropped her bag by the couch, walked straight into our room, and plucked the envelope off the dresser. "Eric," she said, holding it out to me, "you've stared at this for weeks. Either rip it up or use it. But stop torturing yourself." I rubbed my face, groaning. I can't. What if it's a joke? A final humiliation? They already laughed in my face. What if I go and there's nothing? She stepped closer, eyes locking onto mine. And what if there's everything? Her words hit harder than I expected. She set the envelope down in my lap and walked out, leaving me alone with the sound of the dripping faucet and the hum of our old refrigerator. I pulled the ticket out again, studying the bold letters. Destination, Bar Harbor, Maine. I had never been to Maine, had no connection there, no reason at all to go, which made it worse or better, because if it meant nothing, why there? The next morning I Googled it. Bar Harbor, small coastal town, lighthouses, fishing boats, Acadia National Park nearby, population barely 5,000. I stared at the images, rocky cliffs, endless ocean, waves crashing against stone. Something about it made my chest tighten. At lunch, I sat in my classroom, uneaten sandwich in front of me, typing my grandfather's name into the search bar alongside. Bar Harbor, nothing. Not a single link connecting him to the town. By the time the final bell rang, my head was spinning. 2 days later, Emily cornered me again. "I checked the flight," she said casually. "It leaves next week. If you don't use it, it's gone." I stared at her, dumbfounded. You looked it up?" She shrugged, hiding a smile. "Someone had to." That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. I turned the ticket over and over in my hands. Claire had fallen asleep against Emily's shoulder during movie night. James was sprawled across the floor with his blanket, and the quiet of our little apartment pressed in around me. The thought of leaving terrified me. I'd never done anything like this. Never stepped outside the neat little lines of my predictable life. My grandfather knew that. He knew I was safe, careful, ordinary. And maybe that's why he gave me this. The following Saturday, I found myself standing in our cramped kitchen, staring at my family. Emily leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me with that half smile that always meant she knew my decision before I did. "I'm going," I said quietly. Her smile widened, soft but proud. Claire's eyes lit up with curiosity. James frowned, worried, but didn't protest. "You should," Emily said. "We'll be fine here. Just promise me you'll call. Every day." I nodded. My throat was tight, but for the first time since the funeral, there was a flicker of something in my chest. Not dread, not humiliation, hope. When the day of the flight arrived, I packed a single bag, clothes, a notebook, my grandfather's old pocket watch, the one thing I had kept after the funeral. Emily drove me to the airport at dawn. The streets were still dark, the city not yet awake. We sat in silence most of the ride, her hand resting on mine. When we pulled up to the drop-off, she leaned across the console and kissed me hard, like she was sending me off to war. "Find out why, Eric," she whispered. "Don't come back until you do." I stood there with my bag slung over my shoulder, watching the taillights of our old minivan disappear into the distance. My heart hammered in my chest. I looked down at the ticket in my hand, the letters blurring as the morning sun hit my eyes. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like the man who got nothing at his grandfather's funeral. I felt like a man on the edge of something I couldn't explain. And as I boarded that plane, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life, my real life, was only just beginning. Eric finally decides to use the ticket and boards the plane, not knowing that in Bar Harbor, something his grandfather left behind will unravel his entire past. The flight to Maine was a blur. I sat in the window seat, staring out as the ground slipped away, the city shrinking beneath me until it was just a patchwork quilt of lights. My seatmate, a woman in her 60s with silver hair, tried making small talk, but I barely heard her. All I could think about was my grandfather, his face, his laugh, the way he'd ruffle my hair when I was a kid and say, "You're sharper than they think, Eric, never forget that." "Why here? Why Bar Harbor?" His face, his laugh, the way he'd ruffle my hair when I was a kid and say, "You're sharper than they think, Eric, never forget that." Why here? Why Bar Harbor? 2 hours later, the plane descended through gray clouds, and I pressed my forehead to the glass. Below me, the Atlantic stretched like a sheet of steel, waves pounding the jagged coast. A lighthouse stood tall on the rocks, its beam cutting across the water like a watchful eye. The moment the wheels hit the tarmac, my chest tightened. I felt like I was stepping into a chapter I hadn't meant to read. The airport was small, barely bigger than a bus station. I collected my bag and stepped outside into the cold sea air. It smelled of salt and pine, sharp and clean compared to the smog I was used to. That's when I noticed the first odd thing. A man stood by the exit doors holding a cardboard sign. My name was on it. Eric? My stomach dropped. Nobody knew I was coming here. Nobody except Emily and my grandfather. The man was tall, maybe late 50s, with a weathered face and hands that looked like they'd spent a lifetime working nets or ropes. He wore a thick wool coat and a cap pulled low. "You're Roland's grandson," he said, not asking but stating. I froze. "Yes, how do you—" "Come on," he interrupted, turning toward a dark pickup truck parked at the curb. "We don't have much daylight." Everything in me screamed to hesitate, to demand answers. But something about the way he carried himself made me follow. We drove in silence along winding roads, pine forests pressing close on either side. Occasionally the trees opened up to reveal glimpses of the ocean, vast and endless. Finally I asked, "Who are you?" The man kept his eyes on the road. "Name's Harris. Worked with your grandfather years ago." I gripped the handle of my bag tighter. "Worked with him doing what?" Harris's mouth twitched, like he almost smiled but thought better of it. "You'll see." That did nothing to calm my nerves. After half an hour, we pulled into Bar Harbor. It looked like a postcard. Clapboard houses, boats bobbing in the harbor, shops with hand-painted signs. Tourists wandered the sidewalks with cameras, but I felt invisible. A stranger dropped into someone else's story. Harris didn't stop in town. He drove past the shops, past the inns, and out toward the cliffs. Finally, he turned down a narrow gravel road that ended at a weathered house perched above the water. "This was his," Harris said, nodding at the house. "Your grandfather spent his summers here. Nobody in the family ever knew." My jaw tightened. He'd kept this place secret. From all of them. Harris handed me a key. He left instructions. "Said you'd come." I stared at the key in my palm. My heart thudded against my ribs. "Instructions?" Harris didn't answer. He tipped his cap, climbed back into the truck and drove off, leaving me standing in front of the house alone. The place looked abandoned. Shutters hung crooked, and the porch sagged with age. But when I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the air was clean, fresh, like someone had been here recently. I set my bag down and looked around. The interior was simple. Wood floors, stone fireplace, shelves lined with books. And on the table in the center of the room sat a leather-bound journal. My grandfather's handwriting covered the first page. "Eric, if you are reading this, then my plan worked. They got their millions. You got the truth. Follow the trail, and you'll understand why you were the only one I trusted. Start in the study. The rest will reveal itself when you're ready." My throat went dry. He'd known. He'd planned all of this. I turned toward the study, a small room off the main hall. A desk sat by the window, and on it another envelope. My name scrawled across the front. Hands shaking, I tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. Black and white. My grandfather standing beside a ship, not a fishing boat, but something larger, sturdier. Behind him, carved into the hull, was a name. The Celeste. And on the back of the photo, 6 words written in his neat script. "Find her. She holds the key." I dropped into the chair, staring at the photo until my vision blurred. What ship? What key? What had my grandfather gotten himself into? The waves crashed outside, steady and relentless. The house groaned against the wind, and I sat there, clutching a photograph of a ship that might not even exist anymore, with the dead man's riddle burning in my hands. I didn't know it yet. But this was the moment my life truly split in two. The life I thought I knew, and the one my grandfather had hidden from everyone. Eric finds his grandfather's hidden summer house, a journal addressed directly to him, and a photograph of a mysterious ship called the Celeste with the cryptic message, "Find her. She holds the key." Sleep was impossible that first night. I sat in the dim light of a single lamp, the photograph clutched in my hand, the journal open beside me. My grandfather's words circled in my head like restless ghosts. Find her. She holds the key. Every creak of the old house made me twitch. Every gust of wind rattling the windows sounded like footsteps. I finally gave up on rest around 3 a.m., pacing the living room with the photo. The Celeste. I whispered the name under my breath, as if saying it aloud might unlock something. By sunrise, I was at the small library in town. The place smelled of old paper and sea air. A young librarian pointed me to the maritime history section when I asked about shipping records. Hours passed. I flipped through dusty ledgers, scanned old newspapers, studied faded photographs of ships that once lined the harbor. Dozens of names, hundreds of faces, but no Celeste. I was about to give up when an elderly man shuffled past, his cane tapping the floor. He glanced down at the photo in my hand. "Where'd you get that?" His voice cracked like dry wood. I froze. "Why? Do you know it?" His eyes narrowed. "That ship went down. Decades ago. Everyone knows that." He turned and shuffled away before I could ask more. That night back at the house, I combed through the journal again. Page after page of my grandfather's looping handwriting. Some entries were about fishing trips, others about business. But buried halfway through, I found a line that made my heart slam. "If the Celeste is ever found, it all comes undone." I stared at the words until they blurred. What could possibly come undone? His company? His fortune? His legacy? I thought about my cousins, about their smug faces at the funeral, clutching their millions. Did they know about this? Had he hidden it from them too? Or was I the only one? The next morning I went back into town. This time I headed for the docks. Fishermen were unloading crates, their shouts carrying over the gulls and the slap of water against wood. I showed the photograph to one of them, a burly man with a beard down to his chest. "Celeste?" he muttered, squinting at the picture. "Heard stories. Old wreck. Dangerous waters." He handed the photo back and leaned closer. "Best let sleeping ghosts lie." The word sent a chill through me, but I couldn't let it go. That evening, as I walked back toward the house, I noticed something that made my skin prickle. A car I didn't recognize was parked down the road. Black sedan, tinted windows, engine off. When I got closer, it pulled away slowly, tires crunching over gravel, disappearing around the bend. I stood there in the middle of the road, my pulse thudding in my ears. No one knew I was here, except Emily and Harris, and now, maybe someone else. Back inside, I tore through the study again, desperate for another clue. That's when I noticed a loose floorboard under the desk. I pried it open, heart pounding. Inside was a metal tin, rusted around the edges. I lifted it out, hands shaking, and popped the lid. Inside were old letters, folded maps, and a small brass key. One of the letters was addressed to me. "Eric, if you've come this far, then you're ready. The Celeste is not lost. She was never meant to be found by them. Only by you. The key will open the locker. Trust no one, not even family." My breath caught. The locker? What locker? And trust no one. The words screamed at me from the page. I sat there in the silence of that creaking house, clutching a brass key that felt heavier than any inheritance could ever be. Outside, in the distance, headlights flickered through the trees before vanishing again. Someone was watching, and suddenly the ticket, the journal, the ship. None of it felt like a riddle anymore. It felt like a trap. Eric uncovers a brass key and a cryptic letter from his grandfather warning him. Trust no one, not even family. At the same time, shadowy figures seemed to be watching the house. The brass key felt hot in my palm, though I knew it was only my nerves. I turned it over under the lamplight. Small, worn smooth with use, stamped with a faint number, 217. A locker key. But where? I dug deeper into the tin. Folded maps with notes scribbled in my grandfather's handwriting. Coastal outlines with circles marked along the main shoreline. Most of the names meant nothing to me. Fishing coves, lighthouses, tiny ports. But one note stood out, underlined twice. Bar Harbor Wharf, 217. My chest tightened. The locker wasn't just a metaphor. It was real. The next morning I headed for the wharf. The town was just waking up, gulls crying overhead, fishermen hauling nets from boats. I walked past rows of rusted lockers bolted against the pier wall. Paint peeling, numbers barely visible under years of salt spray. My fingers trembled as I found 217. The brass key slid in perfectly. The lock clicked. Inside was a metal box, heavy and sealed with another smaller lock. Not a padlock, something custom, with a triangular keyhole I'd never seen before. I pulled it out, tucking it under my coat before anyone could notice, and hurried back to the house. I set the box on the desk, staring at it. My grandfather had left me the key to the locker, but not this one.
Why?
I tried prying it, shaking it, even tapping the sides for hollow sounds. Nothing, whatever was inside wasn't meant to come out easy. That's when I noticed an engraving along the edge. Tiny letters etched into the metal. Property of Celeste. The ship again. My pulse raced. Whatever this was, it tied directly to her. That night sleep was impossible again. I kept hearing the sound of tires on gravel outside, catching glimpses of headlights through the trees. Whoever had been watching hadn't gone far. And then, close to midnight, I heard it. Footsteps on the porch, slow, heavy. The floorboards creaked outside the door. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a rusted fire poker by the fireplace, and then held my breath. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in. And then, a faint scrape, like metal against wood. Someone was testing the lock. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might give me away. I tightened my grip on the poker, ready to swing at the first shadow that came through. But suddenly a loud crash from the trees outside startled whoever it was. The footsteps retreated fast, pounding away into the night. I darted to the window, but saw only darkness. The forest swallowing whoever had been there. The next morning I called Emily. My voice shook as I told her what had happened. She was silent for a long moment before whispering, "Eric, maybe you should come home. This sounds dangerous." I swallowed hard, staring at the locked box on the desk. "I can't, not yet. There's something here, Em. Something he wanted me to find." "Then promise me," she said, her voice breaking. "Promise me you won't do it alone." I didn't answer because I already knew. I was alone. My grandfather had made sure of that. Later that day, Harris appeared at the house again. Same wool coat, same unreadable expression. "You've been busy," he muttered, eyeing the open tin on the desk. I stiffened. "You knew about this? The locker?" Harris shrugged. I knew he was hiding something, but not this. His eyes flicked to the sealed metal box. "That, though, that's trouble." I narrowed my eyes. "What do you mean?" Harris leaned closer, lowering his voice. "The Celeste wasn't just a ship, Eric. She was a vault. And some things are buried for a reason." My skin prickled. "What kind of things?" Harris hesitated, then shook his head. "Ask fewer questions, or you won't like the answers." And with that he left, disappearing into the dusk like smoke. I sat alone in the silence, the locked box on the desk, the brass key in my hand, and my grandfather's words echoing louder than ever. Trust no one, not even family. But now I wasn't sure I could even trust the living. Eric recovers a sealed box from locker 217, marked property of Celeste. but the lock is unlike anything he's seen. That night, someone tries to break into the house. Harris warns him. The Celeste was a vault. Some things are buried for a reason. For 2 days, the box sat on the desk like a bomb. I tried everything, knives, screwdrivers, even heating the metal to see if the lock would loosen. Nothing worked. It was built to stay shut until the right key fit. At night, I'd lie awake listening for footsteps on the porch. Whoever had tried breaking in wasn't done with me, I knew it. And still, every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words scratched into the box. Property of Celeste. It wasn't just a name anymore. It was a shadow stretching over every choice my grandfather had made. And now, over me. On the 3rd morning, I woke to a knock at the door. My pulse jumped. Through the cracked curtain, I saw a woman. Mid-30s, sharp eyes, dark hair tied back. She wore a navy coat and carried a leather satchel. When I opened the door, she didn't wait for an invitation. "You're Eric," she said. "Yes, who are you?" "My name's Lydia," she said briskly. "I work for the Historical Preservation Office here. And before you ask, yes, I know about the Celeste." My throat went dry. "Why are you here?" She held up her satchel. "Because if you found what I think you found, you're in danger." We sat at the table, the box between us. Lydia adjusted her glasses, studying the lock. "This isn't a normal mechanism. It's maritime, old. Your grandfather wasn't just running fishing boats. He was transporting things. Valuable things." I clenched my fists. "Like what?" She looked at me steadily. "Artifacts, documents, maybe even gold. But that's not the point. The Celeste was more than cargo. It was leverage. Whoever controlled what was inside controlled. People, families, companies, whole futures." Her words sent a chill through me. "And now," she continued softly, "you're sitting on a powder keg." Before I could respond, a loud crash echoed outside. Tires skidding on gravel. Lydia's eyes widened. "They followed me." I shot up, heart hammering. "Who?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled something from her satchel, a small triangular key, glinting in the light. My breath caught. "You had the key this whole time?" She shoved it into my hand. "Not me, your grandfather. He gave it to my father years ago, told him to pass it on when the time was right. And Eric," her eyes locked onto mine, "he said only you were to open it." The pounding of boots hit the porch. The front door rattled as someone tried the handle. With trembling hands, I jammed the triangular key into the lock. It fit perfectly. The mechanism clicked, gears grinding inside the metal. The lid creaked open. Inside was a bundle of papers, neatly tied with twine, and beneath them, something wrapped in oilskin. I barely had time to glimpse the first page, stamped with government seals and names. I recognized from the news, before the front door exploded inward. Men in black jackets stormed the room, faces hidden, voices barking commands. Lydia shoved me sideways, shouting, "Run!" But my eyes were locked on the open box, the truth spilling out before me like a secret my grandfather had died to protect. And in that split second I knew, whoever these men were, they hadn't come for me. They had come for this. Eric unlocks the box with the triangular key. Lydia delivers. But just as he glimpses explosive documents inside, masked men burst into the house to seize it. The room erupted in chaos. Shouts, footsteps, the splintering crack of wood as men in black jackets rushed forward. Lydia tried to shield me, but one of them shoved her to the ground. Another lunged for the box. Instinct took over. I grabbed the bundle of papers, clutching them to my chest. "Give it to us," one of them barked, his voice rough, urgent. But I wasn't letting go. Not after everything my grandfather had put in motion. They ripped the box from the table. scattering the oilskin package across the floor. It tumbled open, revealing not gold, not jewels, but a small battered notebook. The men froze for half a second, and in that pause, I understood something. This wasn't about money. It was about control. The notebook wasn't just a diary. It was a ledger. Page after page filled with names, powerful families, corporations, politicians. Beside each name, numbers, coded references, offshore accounts, proof of corruption buried for decades. And at the very bottom of one page, underlined twice in my grandfather's heavy hand, was a single word: Celeste. Lydia gasped when she saw it. Eric, this could bring down half the city. The men surged forward again. One of them grabbed the notebook. Another reached for me, ripping the papers from my grip. But before they could escape, the distant wail of sirens cut through the chaos. Blue and red lights flared against the windows. The men bolted, snatching what they could, disappearing into the woods behind the cabin. The front door slammed in their wake. I was left trembling, heart pounding, clutching the last few pages that hadn't been stolen. Hours later, at the sheriff's office, I sat under buzzing fluorescent lights, staring at the fragments of my grandfather's secret. Lydia leaned close, her voice barely a whisper. He knew this would happen. That's why he left it to you, not your cousins, not the empire-hungry vultures, you. I shook my head. But why me? She gave a small, knowing smile. Because you're the only one who wouldn't sell it. He didn't want the money protected, Eric. He wanted the truth revealed. That night, back in the quiet of the cabin, I opened the last surviving page. At the top was a date, a month from now. And beneath it, 6 words written in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. The Celeste will rise. Again, Eric learns the box contains a ledger of corruption tied to the mysterious Celeste. But as half of it is stolen and his enemies escape, he's left with only a single page foretelling something even bigger. The Celeste isn't gone. It's coming back.